If you're like us and grew up in Minnesota, chances are you've heard of the Glensheen Mansion in Duluth. And like us, you probably only ever heard of it in reference to it being a crime scene. And that's basically its whole reputation. It's a beautiful house on Lake Superior with beautiful views. And oh yeah, murder. And honestly, that's exactly what drew both of us to visit it years ago, to get the full true crime scene experience. But when you actually visit Glensheen, the tour guides don't bring up the murders at all. They don't ignore it. They're not pretending it didn't happen, but they focus their time on something neither of us expected. The Congdon family, the actual humans who lived there for 70 years before any of that happened. And walking through it, it's easy to be distracted by things that have nothing to do with a crime scene. The woodwork, a weirdly specific taxidermy collection, old family photos where everyone looks vaguely uncomfortable, like people did in every photo before 1960, a chair someone clearly loved. By the end, Glensheen didn't feel like a true crime location anymore. It felt like somebody's house, because that's exactly what it was for decades. And that story is buried under one very bad night. So today, before we get to the part you may already know, let's talk about who these people actually were. If you've never been, Duluth is this wild collision of two totally different landscapes. There's Lake Superior on one side, looking more like an ocean than a lake, and thick northern Minnesota forest and hills on the other. Ships the size of city blocks slide under the aerial bridge. It's genuinely a striking place. But back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Duluth wasn't just scenic, it was booming. The Iron Range had just been discovered, and iron ore was basically the fuel for America's entire industrial explosion. Railroads, skyscrapers, factories, all of it. And Duluth became one of the cities riding that wave the hardest. Enter Chester Adgate Congdon, a lawyer from New York who moved west right into the middle of Minnesota's mining boom. Chester was a smart cookie. He served as general legal counsel to Oliver Mining Company and assisted Andrew Carnegie, some other rich guy, in legal battles and acquisitions. He bought cheap mining lands that eventually were leased back to U.S. Steel at top dollar. He also served as president on Chemung Iron Company and Canisteo Mining Company, while also holding other directional roles across the country in other mining interests. Chester's impressive moves made the Congdon family extremely wealthy. And what does an affluent family man do with all his moolah? He builds a stupidly enormous house, of course. In all fairness, Chester wasn't just another rich guy trying to build himself a trophy house. He was genuinely involved in Duluth. He served in the Minnesota Senate, backed civic and education projects, and helped shape the city he planned to call home. Construction started on Glensheen in 1905. Chester had the money and the vision, but it would be his baby mama, Clara, who actually turned that vision into somewhere people wanted to live. So yeah, Chester's a big deal with all his power, money, and business acumen, so he's the one the history books remember. But his wife Clara was pretty impressive too. She graduated from Syracuse University and was a teacher and an assistant headmaster in Canada for a bit. But like many women of the time, she packed up and moved to Minnesota with Chester once he was hired for his first job as a lawyer. Now, Chester and Clara got busy making a family, and by the time the Glensheen was built in 1908, they had 7 children. The massive house was cutting edge for the time with running water, electricity, and jaw-dropping craftsmanship. But the finished touches were made by Clara. She got busy making a 39-room house into a comfortable family home, one in which her children laughed and played, the guests felt welcome, and memories were made. Glensheen was created with the help of Clarence Johnstone, a man who designed ornate buildings for the University of Minnesota. Clara worked closely with Johnstone on the 21-acre property, both inside and out. Clara's fingerprints are all over the grounds, the gardens, the pathways, the fountain, all of it overlooking the lake. It wasn't just there to impress dinner guests. It was designed to actually be enjoyed, which honestly says a lot about her. Here's a group that almost never gets mentioned when people talk about Glensheen: the staff. A house that size doesn't run itself. Glensheen existed because of a lot of people, not just the Congdons. The visionary, the builders, the family, and the staff who kept the whole thing running for decades. The people who arrived early, stayed late, and knew the rhythms of the house better than almost anyone. Today, visitors often enter through the front door, but the people who kept Glensheen functioning often moved through a different world. There were separate entrances, separate work areas, and separate routines. The mansion had spaces designed specifically for the household staff, including service areas and a servant's courtyard where daily work happened away from the formal rooms guests saw. Upstairs, the family enjoyed the finished product. Downstairs, people made that product happen. But the staff were not simply anonymous workers. They were people with their own stories. They had family, friendships, disagreements, and lives outside Glensheen. One example is William Atherton, the family's first butler, an English immigrant hired during a time when having an English butler was considered a symbol of sophistication in wealthy American households. His time at Glensheen was not perfect. Records show personality conflicts between him and other members of the household, reminding us that even inside a beautiful mansion, everyday life was still complicated. Nonetheless, the staff at the Glensheen kept the house alive, quietly in the background and out of sight. Eventually, every historic house reaches the point where the people who built it are gone, and somebody has to carry the story forward. At Glensheen, Elizabeth Congdon, Chester and Clara's youngest daughter, would carry that mantle. For Elizabeth, Glensheen was never a historic estate. It was just home, the place she knew her parents, remembered her siblings, and lived nearly her entire life. A room wasn't an exhibit to her. It was where something actually happened. As the years went on and her siblings moved out and started their own families, the responsibility of the family home landed on Elizabeth. And here's a detail that gets lost a lot. Preservation of Glensheen didn't start because of a tragedy. In 1968, nearly a decade before anything happened, the Congdon family donated the estate to the University of Minnesota Duluth, with an agreement letting Elizabeth live there for the rest of her life. They already knew this place meant something bigger than just our house. And Elizabeth deserves way more than the one sentence most people know her for. She was a mother to 2 adopted daughters. Like her father, she quietly poured herself into her community. She was the first president of the Duluth Junior League, and she worked with the American Red Cross, St. Luke's Hospital, and the Duluth Public Library. She even set up a scholarship at UMD anonymously, just because. Elizabeth's granddaughter, Suzanne Congdon Leroy, wrote a whole memoir about her entitled Nightingale, a memoir of murder, madness, and the messenger of spring. She was inspired to write this memoir after realizing how little she'd known about her grandmother's life before health issues changed everything. Suzanne has said outright that she doesn't want Elizabeth remembered only as a victim, but as the advocate she actually was. Before Elizabeth became connected to one of Minnesota's most infamous crimes, she was a daughter who grew up at Glensheen and spent her life continuing her family's legacy of quietly giving back. She would be the last person who knew this house as home. This is usually where the Glensheen story starts for most people. June 27th, 1977. That night, Elizabeth was at home, along with her night nurse, Velma Piatila, someone who deserves to be remembered as more than just a name attached to a tragedy. She had her own life, her own family. She was simply doing her job that night. Both women were killed, and it shook Duluth to its core, not just because of what happened, but because of where. This wasn't some random building. It was Glensheen, a place tied to generations of the city's history. Suddenly, the center of a murder investigation. The case that followed, involving Elizabeth's adopted daughter, Marjorie Congdon, and her husband, Roger Caldwell, became one of the most talked about criminal cases in Minnesota history. For a lot of people, that's genuinely all Glensheen means now. But it shouldn't be the whole story. The tragedy is real and the victims matter, full stop. But one night, no matter how dark, doesn't erase 70 years of everything that came before it. Any place that becomes famous for something terrible runs into the same problem. How do you remember it? Do you let that one moment define it forever, or do you hold on to everything else too? For Glensheen, I think the answer has to be both. The 1977 murders are part of its history, sure, but they're not the only history there. Places are made of layers. The person who dreamed it up, the people who built it, the family who lived in it, and yes, the events that reshaped how the world sees it. Glensheen has all those layers, whether people choose to look at them or not. When you walk through it today, you're not just standing where a crime happened. You're standing in the world the Congdons built. Chester's ambition, Clara's eye, for making a house feel lived in, kids growing up completely unaware they become historical figures someday. That's the strange thing about history in general. Nobody living through it knows they're making it. They're just having breakfast, looking out a window, living an ordinary day inside a genuinely extraordinary house. When we first went to Glensheen, we fully expected to leave thinking about the murders, the investigation, the mystery of all of it. Instead, we left thinking about Chester and Clara, building something together during a moment when Duluth itself was transforming. About 7 children who just saw it as home, about the staff who kept the whole place running, and about Elizabeth. Not how her life ended, but how much life happened before that. If the murders are the only thing we remember, we lose almost everything that actually mattered. The ambition, the family, the decades of ordinary life. The real story of Glensheen isn't that something terrible happened in a beautiful mansion. It's that a beautiful mansion and a whole family's history existed long before that one night and deserves to be remembered for more than how it ended. So yeah, we came to Glensheen interested in the murders. We left captivated by everything else. The information provided in this video is used for educational purposes only. Please visit the links to learn more. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe or leave us a comment below. Thank you for watching.